Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today we're going back to the 1950s to take a look at what I think is one of the classiest Japanese rangefinders out there, the Konica IIIA. So stick around. Before we jump in with the Konica, I want to take a look at this episode's featured photo sent in from John Rivera and shot with a Kuribayashi BB Semi First on Kodak Gold 200. I absolutely love this shot. The backlighting in the foreground and the way the background elements are handled creates something I just want to stare at for hours. And it makes me want to be there in that spot. Now, I had to look up that camera because it's one I don't know a lot about. And John said the only reason they had it was because someone sold it to them as a Zeiss icon. Well, this is proof that it's a pretty good performer nonetheless. So thanks for sending this one in. Now, about the Konica. I've talked about Konica before on the channel last year when I did a review of the Auto Reflex T3 and how I thought that they're not always given enough credit for pushing the envelope of what cameras can actually do. Konica can trace its roots back to the early 1870s when it began as a pharmacy that eventually got into the business of selling photographic products. And by 1903, they were producing their own camera. And what do we owe Konica? Well, for the Konica Auto Reflex of the late 1960s, it was the first 35mm focal plane shutter SLR to use shutter priority auto exposure. And in the 1970s, they were the first to market with a true autofocus camera, the Konica C35. These are all big camera evolution moments because these features would eventually become standard on almost all cameras. But between 1947 and 1960, they also gifted the photography world with a series of rangefinders with excellent build quality. They started with the Konica I around 1947. Actually, at that point, it was just called the Konica. It used a retractable 50mm lens, either a 3.5 or 2.8 version. And over the next few years, there would be a ton of minor changes made. Some were marked Made in Occupied Japan, later ones were marked Made in Japan. Shutter markings might be different, minor things like that, but the camera was basically the same. In 1951, the Konica II was released. It also used a retractable lens, this time a 50mm 2.8 hexanon. Then there was the Konica IIB, lowercase b, which was a bit of a budget version which sported a 50mm 3.5 hexar in place of the hexanon. In 1956, the Konica IIA was released as the new top-of-the-line camera. Its highlight was the use of a brand new 48mm f2 hexanon lens that was fixed and not retractable like the early models. And there was also the Konica IIB, uppercase B, that was again a more budget model sporting a 45mm 3.5 hexar lens. Now up to this point, advancing the film and cocking the shutter were two separate steps. But also in late 1956, the Konica III was released, and it was a step up from the two models by way of a single lever advancing the film and cocking the shutter at the same time. And this lever wasn't on the top of the camera, but mounted on the front of the camera. And this model also sported the fancy f2 lens. Now with all of these different models, 1, 2, 3, and all the little variations within the model series like uppercase B or lowercase b, etc., makes for a very confusing and slightly overwhelming number of choices to contend with if you're interested in buying one of these. But I'm going to make it simple. What you're going to want to get your hands on is the Konica IIIA, uppercase A, because it's not just a sub-model of the Konica III series. It's different enough that it could have been its own series. It was released in 1958, and it has a much better viewfinder than the previous models. But the story's not completely done. The following year in 1959 saw the release of the Konica IIIM. It added a meter and the ability to shoot in half-frame mode. And that was the last one of the series. I thought going through all the different versions of the Minolta SRT series was complicated, but I've just barely scratched the surface on all of these. The Konicas could be a camera collector's dream or nightmare depending on how you want to look at it. The standard lens again was the 48mm f2 version, which is what we have here. But Konica also had the option of a 50mm 1.8 lens, and that was the fastest lens that had been offered so far. Both lenses are coated 6-element designs based on the Zeiss planar. Now, I've read that the 50mm 1.8 was for the export market and the 48mm f2 was for the domestic Japanese market. And I'm wondering that if that is the case, why would that be? If you know the answer to that, please let me know down in the comments. The shutter on both of the available lenses is a Konica MXL. However, the one with the 50mm version of the lens is larger. And one difference that I've read about, and one you might need to be aware of, is that the Konica shutter on the 48mm version is harder to repair because of a lack of parts these days. Apparently, the shutter on the 50mm is more common and easier to repair if the need should arise. So, let's go over the controls. First thing you'll probably notice is that over on the left side of the lens you have this odd lever. This is the film advance, and it takes 2 strokes to advance the film to the next frame and charge the shutter. The shutter speed and aperture control is controlled by 2 rings on the lens. When this camera came out, the light value system was the fad of the day, and the IIIA makes use of it as well. What this means in practical usage is that the shutter and aperture rings can be locked together once the light value is set. Now, the benefit of this system is that once it's set, every time you change the shutter speed, the aperture will follow and always ensure the correct exposure. The main drawback of the light value system is that operation of these rings can get fiddly when trying to set them. We don't really think in terms of the light value system today, for better or for worse, and the interlock mechanism is something you'll either have to get used to or, as I've recently read, have it disabled. I don't know what all's involved in disabling it, so I don't know if that's something that you can do yourself. However, my thoughts are that it's not that much of a pain to use as is, and if I did decide to have that disabled, I'd certainly have it done by a professional, just to make sure I don't screw up anything on this super nice camera. So let's take a closer look. The shutter speed ring is closest to the front of the lens with speeds from 1 to 1/500th of a second plus B. There are knurled edges here to make it easier to turn. Next is the aperture ring. This camera is equipped with the 48mm f2 lens, and the f-stop range is from f2 to f22. The aperture ring has no knurled edges, so it's a bit hard to grip. But this is mainly because if you're using the light value system as intended on this camera, you don't really have a need to turn it by itself. The black ring right behind the aperture ring is for the light value system. This ring does have a couple of areas on either side to make it easier to grip. And if we were using the light value system, here's where you'd set it. Pulling back on the ring unlocks it from the aperture ring and allows you to turn it to set the correct light value. These are the numbers running 2 to 18 on the black ring. There's a small red arrow where you align the light value number. And once the light value is set, the aperture and shutter rings are locked, and moving either the black light value ring or the shutter speed ring will move them in tandem. Now, how do we set this if we don't care about using the light value system? Because we're probably not going to use that today. One way is to set your desired aperture first, and you do this by either moving the light value ring or the shutter ring. Next, I'm going to pull back on the light value ring and rotate it until I get the shutter speed I want. So I'm sort of treating this like an aperture priority system. It might seem complicated, but it's not really that much. Then there's the second way. You can move the aperture ring totally independent of the others by pulling back on the light value ring on the side by the wine lever, just this side. This completely disengages it from the other rings and it moves relatively easy. It does not have any of the knurled places to make it easier to grip, but you can turn it by itself. It's only slightly difficult to turn because it doesn't have those rib places to grip it, but either one of these ways will work. Behind the light value ring is the focusing ring, and it has a little tab at the bottom that makes it easy to feel and grip. That ring also has a distance scale. This camera is in meters only because it was intended for the domestic Japanese market. And right next to the camera body is the depth of field scale. If the camera was made for export, though, those distances would be marked in feet. Over on the top right, you have the shutter release and the frame counter. On the front of the camera, just below that, is the self-timer. And while we're here, let me point out a couple of other things on the lens, where we have the PC socket right here. And in this case, you have a choice between M, F, and X sync. The camera has a cold shoe for accessories, but no hot shoe. Over on the top left of the camera is the rewind lever. On the bottom, we have the film rewind button, the tripod socket, and a nice little D-ring key to open or lock the back. Now, to open the back, you need to flip up the D-ring, turn this so that the arrow points to O, and press the key down. And this depresses a small button in the recessed area of the latch that pops open the back. Pretty cool. To lock it, it's going to close the back. I'm going to rotate the D-ring until the little arrow points to C, and then I'm going to close it down there. I'm going to fold the key back down in that recessed area. Be sure you remember to turn it back to C, or you'll be risking opening the back by accident. So watch this. Got it open, the back is closed. I set it down. Oh, there it went. So make sure you turn that D-ring to where the arrow is pointing to C. Loading film is about like any other camera. In this camera, film runs left to right. Normally, I want to use the rewind crank to take up any slack in the film cartridge. Then as I advance to the first frame, I can watch to see if it turns. This just gives me a visual indication that the film is loaded correctly. And I can do that on this camera too. I just need to leave the rewind crank in the unfolded position. If I fold it back down, it won't turn even if the film is advancing correctly. Now, last but definitely not least, we need to talk about this viewfinder. It's nothing short of legendary. First, it's a 1-to-1 viewing ratio, and what you see through the viewfinder is rendered the same size as reality. You can hold the camera up to your right eye, open your left eye, and both eyes are now seeing the subject rendered at the same size. If you like to shoot with both eyes open, this makes it easier to do. Secondly, it's very bright and the rangefinder patch is very easy to see. And thirdly, it has frame lines which move to correct for parallax, but they also change in size to give a more accurate view when focusing close. I think you could put this viewfinder up against any rangefinder, even ones that came along 40 years later, and it would still be close to the top of the list. I would say this viewfinder is to rangefinders what the Olympus OM series viewfinder is to SLRs. So, enough talking, let's go shoot. I'm headed out to a classic car show with some Ilford Delta 100, so I will see you there. We got lots of chrome right here. Lots of chrome. All right, let's take a reading. F8 at 80. So let's go F8. I don't know.
Let's go for a smaller depth of field. Let's go f4 at 1/500. All right. Let's also shoot this way. I am shooting into the sun a little bit, but I think I'll be okay. Well, we'll see anyway, won't we? There's an interesting angle here. Let's go 1/250 at 5.6½. All right. All right, this is the angle I wanted. All right. All right, so this is more of a matte finish paint job here, but it doesn't make it any less interesting because we've got several different shades of gray, or we will have. All right, so let's see. F8 at 200. All right, so I've got F8 at 250. Let's do one of this. All right. Like that again. So that was with the Konica IIIA. It is a little bit fiddly to change the f-stops as opposed to the shutter speeds because they're locked together with that light value system. I mean, you can press on this side of the light value ring and you can turn the f-stop ring by itself, but it has no grip, so you're just sort of looking for a place where you can grab onto it. It's made to be used in conjunction with the shutter speed ring. And if I had more time to fiddle around with it and maybe see if I could utilize the light value scale, maybe that would have worked better. Got through with the roll quicker than I thought I would. Maybe because I was just in a hurry because it's hot. So let's see how these came out. I actually have no idea. I thought I could nail focus on all of them. I think I did. But shooting with a rangefinder is different than a SLR. Nice little camera though. Feels really, really good. All right, see you back at the studio.
Man, the heat was brutal, like it always is around here. But I got some cool shots. I know I've said it here before, but I just love the way black and white film renders chrome and shiny paint jobs on classic cars. It always is one of my favorite subjects. Now, historically, I've not been much of a rangefinder user, and I think that's probably evident in some of those shots. I always like to crop my shots in camera without leaving a lot of extra space to deal with later. So I'm trying to get more acclimated to not trying to frame everything up in the finder exactly. Having parallax correcting frame lines in the viewfinder is great, but I still need to loosen up on my framing just a little bit so I have some room to play around with cropping after the fact. But this is strictly a me problem, not a camera issue. As for the Konica IIIA, well, it is a fantastic camera. Feels precise and well made, and the lens is excellent. At least the f2 version is, but I can't imagine that the 1.8 version is a less than stellar performer either. The viewfinder is superb. Very bright and clear with an equally bright rangefinder spot. This is a fine picture-taking machine. If I have to knock it for anything, It'd just be the way the shutter and aperture settings are hooked together to make use of that erstwhile light value system. But there are workarounds, as we covered earlier, so don't let that be a deal breaker for you. The method of film advance is unique, but not at all cumbersome, and it's kind of cool if you ask me. Do you need to add a Konica IIIA to your wish list? I think you do. But before we go, let's look at the specs one more time. The Konica IIIA is a 35mm rangefinder camera introduced in 1959. The original retail price was $99.95, which equates to about $1,100 US in 2025 money. The lenses available are the Hexanon 48 f2 for the Japanese domestic market and the 50mm 1.8 for the export market. Aperture range is f2 or f1.8 to f22. The camera features a Seikosha MXL leaf shutter with speeds from 1 second to 1/500th of a second, plus B with X-Sync at all speeds via a PC contact. There is no hot shoe, only an accessory shoe. The exposure mode is fully manual, and the camera uses the light value system method for setting shutter speed and aperture, but you can override that even though it's a bit fiddly. The viewfinder is big and bright with a 1:1 magnification and projected frame lines that automatically correct for parallax, and film winding is via the double stroke lever on the front. And the 48 f2 version I have here weighs in at 800 grams or about a pound 13 ounces. So even though it has a small form factor, it still has some weight to it. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the Konica IIIA. If so, please hit that like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the cool stuff we got coming up. Also, a big thanks to John Rivera for this episode's featured photo. Y'all keep the submissions coming in. If you have a photo you'd like to submit, just send me an email and I'll put that link down in the description. So, until next time, put some film in that old camera and create something new. And I'll see you then.